September 4th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. A little technical adjustment here. You good? All right. So the main purpose of tonight's meeting is to conduct a study session on the 2024 Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan Transportation Element. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those who are participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not scheduled for hearing on tonight's agenda, and there are no hearings tonight, so comment as needed. Please limit those comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember this during your comments. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. We do not have anyone on the sign-in sheet, and I don't believe we received any email.
No, we didn't receive any comments tonight.
Okay, so no comments submitted by the 3 p.m. time. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for viewing on the city's YouTube channel. The call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For phone-in callers during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone can follow along. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of commissioners. Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Lever.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Sills.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here, thank you.
All right. In addition, Steve Morikawa, Deputy Public Works Director, and Riyad Tarini, our Transportation Supervisor, are in attendance at the table here. Welcome. And lastly, before we begin, we'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound because there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you wish to speak, please indicate by raising your hand, and I will call on you as I see you. This will help avoid the problem of having 2 people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. First item on the agenda is public comment. As indicated, we have not received any comments in writing. No one on the sign-up sheets. Is there anyone in the Zoom space? Nope. So that said, there are no public comments this evening. We can move on to approval of the July 17 minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Commissioner Sills, motion to approve.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Commissioner Lever-Ortiz, second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the July 17th minutes. Any discussion around those minutes? Comments? Seeing none, all in favor of approval of the July 17 minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, the July 17 minutes are unanimously approved. With that, we will move on to the principal item on tonight's agenda, the study session around the 2024 Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan Transportation Element. And Deputy Director Morikawa will introduce this topic.
Yes, thank you. Hang on. Let's see. Get this on top. Share. Yay. Okay. All right. Good evening, Commissioners and Chair. Tonight we'll be presenting a comprehensive plan, transportation element, project and program draft list. And I have Kendra Braylon from Fern Pier. She's a principal there, and she's been helping us work through this whole process through the last year and a half at least. And Rayed Tiri, who's our transportation supervisor, who's also been working on this as well. Putting together and reviewing a 20-year project or program list is a difficult thing. It's feels really kind of detailed because it identifies specific projects. However, we must recognize that this is a planning period of 20 years, and it's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen over that 20-year period. Fortunately, the comp plan is a living document, and it's likely that we'll be able to amend and adjust it as we go. This is our best snapshot plan, given what we know today. And so as we go through this, certainly get to understand the projects and the programs, but don't forget to take a step back and look at it as a 20-year program. So overall, the comp plan, previously, I think the last time we talked to you, Cameron then talked to you, we identified the preferred alternative with you, and staff is working to put that together, the plan together, and finish that up, as well as working on the final EIS. We're continuing to meet with the Planning Commission as well as the Council. We'll have public hearings coming up, and the goal is still to adopt the plan by the end of the year. For the overall comp plan, while we still have the draft plan on the website, I think the major public engagement opportunities are pretty much behind us, other than the public's opportunity to attend upcoming Planning Commission and council meetings, study sessions, as well as public hearings. I'll go about a little bit about public outreach in the future later, though. So we're here tonight again to present the draft 20-year transportation project and program list, talk to you about the anticipated revenue to support it, and no action is required, but of course we'd love to hear your feedback. So go backwards. Oh. Okay, so for the transportation element specifically, we've completed, or Kendra's team has completed all our analyses, the model running, the safety program and everything. And we used the prioritization criteria that you and the council worked on to develop the draft program and project list. And it is constrained by available funding. We're trying to finish up the transportation element section at this point, wrap up our contribution to the final EIS, work through the study sessions and public hearings with the rest of the team and the rest of the plan, and get closer to adoption. So tonight, what I want to do is kind of recap the project identification and project program prioritization process, because when we talked about this a few months back, the process was just as important as that prioritization and how we worked our way through it. I'm going to give you kind of an executive summary of the results, which you guys probably have already read. And then we'll kind of go over the list itself, hitting the highlights and trying not to get stuck on every single project, but we can certainly talk about specific projects. And then briefly, we'll go over the next steps with you. So let's go over the project list, the development and prioritization process. So this should look kind of familiar to you. We work with both you and the council. Remember, we adopted the bike plan a couple years ago, and then you folks, as well as the council, worked through a prioritization process to identify and prioritize missing sidewalk gaps. So those kind of provide our modal plan projects, bike projects and sidewalk projects. We suggested completing projects that we've already started, like we are in the middle of design or we're in the middle of the right-of-way process for certain projects, many of which we have received grants, and it's probably not a good idea to stop the project. We probably have to return funds and go backwards. We're also suggested before to continue to fund existing programs such as pavement preservation, sidewalk program, bridge program, bike program, safety program. And we'll talk about those as well. We started with the vehicle capacity projects that were identified in the old 2015 plan. Those are the ones that in 2015 we had to finish in a 20-year period in order to make our transportation vehicle system work. We also included projects that we went through a Canyon Park sub-area plan, and they came up with projects as well. Some of them overlap with the 2015 projects. And then prior to that, we had a downtown sub-area plan that kind of kicked all this off, and we had projects in there, some of which we've completed, some of which we still have outstanding. So that was kind of our starting point. So then we identified new projects. We went through a whole safety plan update, and we identified areas in the city that were higher risk corridors, and we identified projects in terms of safety. And Raya did a really good look at resiliency, about the different aspects of resiliency that we should probably start addressing, because climate change is happening, earthquake is imminent sometime, so things like that we want to start considering. If they were not already included in some of the vehicle capacity projects, what we did then was we tried to combine the bike projects and the PED projects, safety projects and resiliency projects that made sense to put together. Sometimes it made sense to put it together, like if you're going to build a new sidewalk and there's no sidewalk or bike facility there, you want to do both at once. You can't just do one. Sometimes, however, you're doing maybe an intersection improvement like a roundabout. But just because it's touching a quarter-mile corridor that doesn't have sidewalks doesn't mean we wouldn't want to focus on the safety or whatever of that intersection. So some things practically go well together and some things don't, and we have to consider some of that. Yeah. So then what we did, once we combined those, we applied the criteria to those projects. Now, we did find some 2015 projects that are not what we feel were capacity, so we actually ran them through the prioritization process to point system them to see if they would still hold up. And in some cases, we have a couple recommendations that we would drop some projects. We also, amazingly, probably impact of COVID as well, we didn't have to add any capacity projects. So we started with somewhat less. We actually dropped a couple of them. And we're starting somewhat less than what we started with in 2015. Let's see. Yep. Okay. So then, just as a reminder, this is the point system that we used. Not going to go through it again, but we did use this and apply it to, again, a lot of the projects that were combined together. As a reminder, ITS, and Ryan will correct me if I'm wrong, Intelligent Transportation Systems, and TSMO, which we call TSMO, is Transportation System Management and Operations, which is a mouthful. But basically what it is things like Transportation Demand Management, which is TDM, kind of like the one we're starting in Canyon Park right now, where we provide incentives, we try to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles. And things like adaptive signal control, which we've just completed a corridor's work to try to connect up signals and make corridors that are existing more efficient rather than building out. So then what we do, once we have the draft project list, we have to figure out the revenue available over that 20-year period. And this is kind of an iterative process because, first of all, we have to understand the scope of what we want there. You know, are we replacing sidewalks? Are we replacing sidewalks and bike lanes and doing safety improvements? How long along the corridor are we doing this? And then once we get the estimated costs and we have a draft list, this is how much it's going to cost, we have to figure out how much revenue we have associated with that. And it is kind of iterative because it's not a fixed revenue. Once we have projects, we can go after grants for projects. We have to try to anticipate what kind of grants each project would bring in. We toss that in and we see if we can balance it all out. So the executive summary, which I think I provided in your memo, basically a few things we want to point out. Again, this is looking at the bigger picture, not at each specific project. It works with the preferred alternative, so it supports the alternative we want to move forward with. It reflects a positive outlook. What I mean by this is City of Bothell is fairly aggressive in grant applications, and this assumes we're going to continue to be aggressive with it. We did not assume we'd get all the grants at the maximum amounts. We tried to tone it down a little and be realistic, but we are being somewhat positive in our outlook. In other words, we are going to be successful in getting kind of substantially what we've been getting, so we have to continue that trend. What it means, though, is we're going to have to do sufficient planning and have strategies to succeed at this. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of effort to fill in grant applications. A lot of agencies our size and smaller have very difficult time because of staffing limitations and the time it takes. You have the same people basically trying to design and build the projects as you do trying to get grant money for it. So we have to be kind of strategic about that. So that may come with a requirement to get sufficient resources, including staff, to go with that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. If you read through the memo, we tried to provide a checklist of some of the things like bike needs, ped needs, safety needs. And you'll notice that a lot of the projects do check off multiple things, like safety, pedestrian, bike, and transit. Most of our projects address these things, and we think that's kind of a cool thing, and that's the trend that we heard everybody wanted to go towards. So that's really cool. The scope of this next 20 years is larger and more costly than the 2015 comp plan. The 2015 year comp plan estimated about $470 million worth of projects. We're almost at $850 million, so it's quite a bit. It sounds like it's doubling, but not really, because the cost of projects over the last 10 years have dramatically gone up. That probably accounts for 30 to close to 50%. And then when we do our cost estimate, we cost estimate for 2024, but it's a 20-year period, so we escalate it up to time of expenditure as best we can. It's not exact science, but so that adds some more percentage points. So it is a big number. It's probably not the double you think about, but it is significant more work. One of the other things we noticed is because we're trying to improve multimodal system, not just vehicle system, there are a lot of corridor projects. So Bothell multimodal that we're starting up here to put in bike lanes and sidewalks as well as get transit down the corridor. We have 228th Street that would be primarily sidewalks and bike lanes. We have East Riverside Drive Trail, which is a long corridor. 527 from like about I-4 or 5 or just north of it to 524. We have a couple new connection points that were identified in Canyon Park sub-area. We would push 20th Avenue, which goes by our shop in Canyon Park and goes north to 524. That would be a brand new road. So would 214th, which would go to the west to 9th Avenue. The idea there is to connect. There's very limited access points to the business park. We're trying to create more, and that's the whole point of that. But what we saw there, these are long linear projects, and they're not cheap. So these are tens of millions of dollars type of projects. There are not very many $1 million, $2 million type of projects. The last thing that we want to kind of bring out to you guys is consideration of potentially some flexibility in some of the projects. So we did the best we could in the bike plan. We tried to identify what facility went everywhere, but in some cases, we feel like maybe if we're given some flexibility to get pretty much the same thing we're looking for, protected facilities, if we do it a different way, we can save some funds and maybe pay for some other project that's lower on the list. The other thing, too, is potentially to fill in gaps first, and I'll talk about that later when we talk about 228. But rather than say we're going to go from point A to point B and do all the frontage and improve everything, if there are facilities already there that serve the purpose, yes, they might not be protected in this next 20 years, but you'll get a full facility for much less than trying to rework the whole street. Again, the thought being that let's weigh whether that's more important than getting some more facilities in other places around the city. Okay, let's see. So this is a map of, and this is where I think looking at the whole picture is important, but this is kind of a map of the projects just to see where they land. You'll see some other maps later on in your memo as well. I will point out in this, for all the maps, one of the things we did miss was, I do have a pointer. On 240th here, on your maps, shows up as a project. But if you actually look in your spreadsheets, It's not funded, so we missed that. Those are one of the projects that was on the border, and I talked about this iterative process, so it fell out of our funded list. So that 240th project is actually not on. And I'll point that out in other maps as well. Okay. So I'm going to start on this end, which is the revenue side, just so you get a feel for how this was developed. So these are the sources of transportation funding that the city has available. The top one are pretty standard. It's real estate excise tax. There's type 1 and type 2 for transportation projects. We typically are limited to type 2. Recology fees sounds kind of weird, but Recology comes in with their huge trucks, and they get a big contract to help us get rid of our solid waste and recycle, but they beat the roads up, so part of their fee goes toward helping us maintain our roadways. Saw cut fees are kind of similar when people come in and do work, whether it's utilities or development, and let's say they put a utility in and they just have to saw cut the area. That tends to degrade a road a little bit. It's just one more place that water can get in, so there are fees that help us try to keep up with those. Developer frontage in lieu of fees is kind of a one-time thing, and it's going to go away. It's not an ongoing thing. There was some development, I believe, in the downtown area that we did some work, and we were able to get fees back because we actually own the property. And part of our deal was, hey, pay us back for the work we did. So that's kind of going away. And unfortunately, Safe Streets and Sidewalk Levy sunsets in the end of 2025. So that funding also goes away, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Transportation impact fees are a huge source of funding for the city, and those essentially come in when there's private development, and it's typically a per-trip cost. And the fee, the $97.6 million you see here is based on the growth that we anticipate and the trips that would be developed by that growth. So it lines up with our land use planning and everything. So you'll note that federal and state grants and allocations are when we go specifically straight to the legislature and ask for designated funds, or to Congress and ask for funds. It's not part of any grant program. You'll see it makes up about little over 50% of the project cost. And that's pretty in line with what has happened historically. We, as a city our size, have to rely on those sources of funding to complete projects, especially projects of this size. So it's not unusual that's not an unusually high number or anything, but it is something to keep in mind that we do have to actually get the grants, write the grants, be successful. We're competing against other agencies as well. Other agency is not much. Hopefully it'll grow, but these are things like Sound Transit comes in. We recently, Sound Transit has a program, access program with their bus rapid transit program, and when they're building their route corridors, they have a competition and say, hey, we have a certain amount of money that we will give to agencies in a competition, and we will help you get better access to a transit stop, whether pedestrian or bike. So we went through that, and we're going to get some funding through that. We assume we'll work with community transit on some things up Bothell way as well. So it's not a large number, but we do try to work with other agencies and get funding as well. So private development, is, it's an interesting thing. So a lot of the infrastructure you see, and Commissioner Westerbeck understands this, is not necessarily public funding. So when growth occurs or redevelopment occurs, oftentimes they're required to do frontage work, like if there's no sidewalks, they build a sidewalk. And a lot of our infrastructure, we're dependent on this development to come in. So growth, sometimes hurts us, but growth also helps us as well. So there's an estimate made. There are certain corridors, like on Bothell Way. We've already started design. People know we're designing. Probably not likely there's going to be a lot of development on that corridor before we actually come in and build it. But there's some areas in downtown that are really ripe for redevelopment that are likely to occur before we get to it, and they will probably build most of that frontage. So that's an estimate of what that participation would be. The last one is probably the key one for us is new revenue sources. Those are things like levy, a new levy that would replace the old levy, or increased business license fees, or increased sales and use tax, or even vehicle license fee increases. Those are some of the things we're looking at to replace the Safe Streets and Sidewalk levy. And we're just making an estimate of what we think it could be or how much would be reasonable to accomplish certain things. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Again, what I find fascinating about this table is how much comes from other sources, the grants and everything. And again, that's that piece of work that I think most people in the city don't understand, how hard the city actually has to work to generate those funds to make improvements and things. Okay, so I'm going to go over the actual project list. Maybe I'll pause. Is there any overreaching question? Okay, great. Okay, so what we started with, like we said, is we took the projects that were in the old plan, the 2015 plan, Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan, Downtown Plan. And these are the capacity projects that we would need to keep at least the base level of working transportation vehicle system. And we call it the level of service E averaged across the corridor. Okay. You'll note, like I said, they're very expensive. There's very few small projects. The 0.9 is 522 Stage 3. We're done with the project. That's just the remaining cost to do mitigation for permits and wetland impact or whatever we had to do. But most of the other are multi-million-dollar. And the longer the corridor, the more the cost is. And that's one of the trends that we saw. I would like to point out the 20th Avenue extension. That's the one in Canyon Park, and that would be a north-south extension. And 214th, which would be the east-west extension to 9th. Although the bike plan says use a protected bike facility, which would be a cycle track on each side. So our typical street looks like a curb and gutter, 5-foot planter, 5 or 6.5 foot cycle track. If you're going uphill, probably 6.5 feet. If you're coming downhill, maybe 5. And then a 5.5 foot sidewalk behind it. In this particular case, both of those are going through wetland areas, or critical areas. Both of them are new roads that don't have any bike facilities at all. And it would be much cheaper for us to build a bike facility, a shared use path on one side rather than on both sides. If you start adding up those widths, it gets really interesting because a 5.5 foot sidewalk and 5 to 6.5 foot bike cycle track is 6.5, 5, and about 12 feet. And so if we can put a 5-foot sidewalk on one side and a 12-foot shared use path on the other behind the protected bike lane, that shrinks up the footprint a little and saves us a lot of money. And it also saves us on environmental impact. So I'm not quite sure, this is a Kendra question, how we would write that in, but this is one of the things we would like you guys to think about and consider and weigh in on. Yep.
Pause for a moment. I'm reaching way back, but when Bruce was here, I recall the 20th Avenue dropping off. And it's back,
It's
which
in
I
the
think is
Canyon
good.
Park. Well,
Okay.
we didn't put it back. It's in the Canyon Park sub-area plan. So
Okay.
we haven't taken it off.
All right. But there was some controversy around that.
I think so. I mean, if you look at it, it's very wet.
Yeah.
It's also one of those that would probably help quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think it would depend a lot upon what Fred Meyer and those stores do.
Yeah.
If they're planning to redevelop, it could be an opportunity. If they don't, it could be we reevaluate things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, 214th, I recall that during the planning there, and that's
Yep.
going to be a controversial one as well.
I think it is. I think what we heard from the community, the 9th Avenue primarily, is if we're going to build 214th, we better improve 9th first.
Yes.
And we just got design money to start on 9th. So that's one thing which is not listed here yet. It's down
Okay.
further. So that order of work would occur. One of the things we also do that I think staff looks at is what should go first and later.
Yes.
And to me, some of these should go later, and let's see how everything is working. And it could be in 5 or 10 years if his TDM works really great. Maybe we don't need all these projects, or we can drop one off or something like that. So again, it's a 20-year plan. It's what we would have to do if we got the growth in that 20 years. But remember, every 5 years or so, we're going to be looking at it closely again.
Thank you.
If I may add something, which is like when you add these new connections, the model assumed vehicles will be using it. So if you take them out, you're going to redistribute the trips, and you may break some intersections where you can't really fix in some cases. So sometimes it's a must-have. Sometimes we could avoid it if traffic does not build the way how we anticipated it to build.
Yep.
What kind of cost savings are we talking about if we put it on both on one side versus?
You got me. I would have to look back at that, but it is fairly significant. I can come back and let you guys know.
Yeah, I
Send
mean,
you
an
guys
approximate
email.
is fine. I'm just trying to, is it like 10%? Is it 50?
It's not
somewhere
half.
between there?
It's not half, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would have to look at it. I would tell you, just generally speaking, if you want an order of magnitude, and this varies tremendously, which is why we do specific cost estimates.
Yeah.
But what we're finding is if you have to improve both sides of the road, it's probably $5,000 per linear foot per side. So a brand-new road is $10,000. And that's probably before you do the wetland impacts and everything. So what this does is essentially just, you could almost, like you said, proportion it out. I'm saving 5 feet out of the roads, and I can take that proportion.
And
So-
presumably it's faster to do, right? Because you're only operating on one side of the street.
In the 214's case, there's a lot of the road there. I think there's 2/3 of the road there. And there's a sidewalk on one side. So we could basically ignore that side and just work on the other side. And that's where the cost savings is. Again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can certainly provide that. With 20th, the deal with 20th is most of it is new, but if you think about the road that goes up to the Bothell Operations Center, it doesn't have any bike lanes or anything on it. So if we were to build it to our standard, we'd have to do both sides. So $5,000, $5,000. If there's already a sidewalk on one side, which I think there is, we can work on it on the other half, which is $5,000, and maybe a little bit more because it's a trail. So not quite the same. So that's kind of the cost savings and how we're looking at it. Yeah.
What I would say, just in terms of like thinking about, hey, shared use path on one side of the road versus potentially bike lanes, and the cost, some of the cost savings, and I'm not a real engineer like Steve, but to think about is when you're building onto a road, you're building it to kind of that engineering road standard, whereas a trail is a little less. You can think about maybe not as heavy of, as much excavation, as much, kind of pavement, it's not carrying as much load, so those are things to kind of keep in mind. But in terms, so that's definitely cost benefit, but on the flip side, you have to think about your intersection treatments. When bikes are on the roadway, that's a pretty predictable format. Drivers are expecting them. Bikes generally know how to operate that, and it's not to say you can't have a great shared use facility. I think you guys have seen lots of those, and I know that's in the bike plan, but you just have to be really thoughtful about kind of those intersection crossings, just to make sure that everyone can safely make it through.
Yep. So there is a definite downside. You don't separate the peds from the bikes. So for the really experienced riders who want to go fast, you're slowing them down on a shared use trail. It's going to be more like the Burke-Gilman Trail than it is a separated cycle track. So there is a downside, but again, that's what we're talking to you about. The trade-off would be higher cost. So there, I specifically left some projects in there that we couldn't fund to talk about that, so you could see which ones that were there, and we could talk about that. And the other thing is, it's not only just the money, it's also the environmental impact, because these two happen to be new roads in kind of sensitive areas. So, even in sensitive areas, we were reluctant to put planter strips because it just doesn't make sense. It's a good buffer for the bike, but you're putting a tree in a false kind of landscaping where there's already natural landscaping. It's kind of a weird thing, so, yeah. Okay, so the last thing on this slide, Bothell Way Multimodal Project, that's the big one. That's the one we're starting already. We have design money. We have, I think we have most of our right-of-way money. We have enough to do phase 1 and 2. We're still looking for a big chunk for phase 3, the inside part, which is expensive. I did want to point out that that one also supposedly has cycle track. We specifically went in our grants and said protected bike facility. So we had some flexibility. So what it's winding up is it'll be on the east side of the roadway. There'll be 10 foot of asphalt behind a 5-foot planter. There'll be a stripe down the middle so that you have a two-way bike. You have a little bit of 6 inches kind of a texture there, so people with visually impaired, and then you have a 5-foot sidewalk in there on the back side. So we are separating them out. But again, that comes at a cost. If we did that for 20th and 214th, we would start widening everything back up again. So it's kind of a balance. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. So these are other capacity projects that were in, again, 2015 plan or the sub-area plans. We're already starting the 19th Avenue multimodal project, and you can see it's a big number again. It's a long corridor, and we're working on both sides of the road. 228th Street widening project is in 35th to 39th, which, if you look closely, is actually in Snohomish County. But we're partnering with them because that roadway affects us quite a bit. So we're partnering, I think it's 25/75, they're paying most of it. But that also is widening that roadway to accommodate turns, but we're working with them. Again, this is their location. We're trying to get some sort of protected bike facility in that segment. You will see the intersections, the left turn lanes, the roundabouts, they're much, much smaller in cost. They're $4 million, $1.3 million, so those are the smaller capacity projects that we are doing. The adaptive signal project is essentially done, both phases. There's still just a little bit of monitoring and calibration that they're going through. So capital operating programs, those are like annual programs that just continue every year, and we have things to do every year. Pavement preservation, the top 7 are existing: pavement preservation, sidewalk, walkway, bridge. Safety used to have multiple ones. We talked about that, I think, before in the capital facility plan to combine them into one to allow us some flexibility. Crosswalk, comprehensive plan, and the bike. Pavement preservation, sidewalk, and crosswalk are dependent also on levy funds, Safe Street and Sidewalk levy funds. And they will be, again, sunsetting at the end of 2025. So you saw the new funds line in the revenue. So if that's, let's say it's a levy or something, our proposal that we show in pavement preservation is essentially to match what we're currently allocating toward arterial pavement preservation. And this includes grant funds. So that's almost, I think it's $2.9 or $3 million a year. And we're basically keeping our pavement rating at about a prime level. Because if you drop it too low, just like your roof, if you let it go too long, you're going to get damage underneath and it's going to cost you even more. So we're trying to hit that right spot. And then we're recommending $1 million a year. Right now we have $330,000 a year to go toward local streets. We really haven't done much to local streets. We've been able to hit a few. We've been able to slurry seal a few, but that wasn't the prime focus of the last levy. So our suggestion is to look at it a little bit more. Comprehensively, the local street conditions are still going to go down, unfortunately. It takes a lot more money than that to keep them up there, but we thought that's a start. And then the crosswalk program, you see in the future, there isn't any funding there. My recommendation is to kind of tuck that into the safety program because it all kind of marries up together pretty nicely. There are a couple new programs that we're recommending is the resiliency program that I think we talked about before, and traffic equipment asset replacement program. I'm putting the traffic demand management, TDM, those are the programs in Canyon Park that tries to get people out of their cars. We're recommending another one in downtown, and that again helps us reduce our vehicle load and hopefully reduce the amount of capital projects we actually have to do. So those are the two things we're putting there. I think they're currently actually called a project in Canyon Park, but what we're finding out is the type of money we traditionally spent on them or weren't supposed to. We need to find another source of funding for those. Okay, so there are a number of projects that are in the draft 2025-2031 capital facility plan. Things like Main Street, Festival Street, to put up bollards for events. The 102nd Avenue Northeast Bridge Replacement Project is in there. That's a condition project. Bridges have a life, and this one is pretty much toward the end of it. We just recently got a $1 million grant to do planning work, and that will do basically what we call a type, size, and location of the bridge. And once we figure those things out with some public outreach, it helps us come up with a better cost and funding plan because those things are really expensive to replace. And it'll help us go after grants a lot better. So we just got a federal planning grant for that one. We have 4 projects on there that are sidewalk related, and those are, we still don't know if we're gonna get grants or not, so we left them in there. We have a rectangular rapid flashing beacon school crossings at 4 locations that we got federal grants for. We have a FEMA repair because we had a washout. It's interesting, it's an emergency repair and we're on the 2nd year already, so, but that's in there. And the last 4.
There's a new washout there too.
Is there?
Yes, there is.
Okay, you can talk to me. So the last 4 are sound transit projects. Those are the access projects I talked to you about, and they would like fill in gaps in sidewalks. You see a bike box there. One of them will put up a flashing beacon on the on-ramp at I-405 at 527. That's the main way you get across to get to the bridge, to get to the parking ride. We want to put a flashing beacon there and for safety. We're working with WashDOT on that one. So those are fully funded, so we left those in there as well. Okay, so I talked to you before that we started off with the comp plan and sub-area plan projects and left them in. And these are the ones that we felt were non-capacity. In other words, they wouldn't help us improve the general vehicle capacity, so they weren't automatically put in. And we scored them. North Creek Trail Section 4 is in construction, so that one's already been done. We just have a little bit amount of mitigation to do. The 242nd, 204th connector, that's the roadway that's just south of Safeway, where there's going to be that roundabout. That's the Lake Pleasant intersection. So now you're going to be able to go from that intersection, not now, but when it opens in a few months, I believe, or a year, I can't remember, you'll be able to get to 7th. So it's a new east-west connection, but it's all done by private. So again, that's that private component of the revenue I talked about. As part of their development, there's enough traffic load there that we needed to work with them to create more connection points. So that's already in. So SR 522 Stage 4 was ranked pretty high. This is another one that I'm pointing out to you that I would like to deviate a little bit from the bike plan. There actually is no bike facility on that stretch of roadway. There's only a sidewalk on the south side. I'm not sure how viable it's to put a sidewalk on the north side because of the grades, and it goes under the bridge. There's, the only thing there is really the park and ride, which starts sloping up really quickly. My thought would be that a shared use path on the south side would be important to be able to connect the mobile home park as well as anybody coming down Kaesner to the regional trail system and the park system that we have there. So that's a proposal for that one. And with including that, that scored pretty high. 35th Avenue multimodal is actually on our current draft CFP. It was there before as well because it was an opportunity to potentially get grant funding. It is not a capacity project. So we scored it as to see where it would rank, and it scored a 66, which you'll see further. It's not at the very top, so it's one of those projects that we're recommending not to fund at this point. Fitzgerald Road Improvements is 27th Avenue Northeast. That's kind of what follows North Creek between just south of 228th and north of 240th along the North Creek Trail. That was to widen the road a little bit and fill in some sidewalk gaps. But there is a North Creek Trail on the west side of that whole roadway. It didn't score very well as well, so we're recommending that we drop those 2 projects from the old 2015 comp plan. So the next group of projects that are non-capacity came from the downtown sub-area, and these are the projects that are kind of left. The sub-area projects, we recommend you keep in, because there was a process that went through the sub-area in detail and identified these projects, and a lot of them were identified as mitigation for something or another. So our recommendation for the downtown sub-area and the Canyon Park sub-area is to keep those projects in until such time as you revisit that sub-area. And if at that time those projects go away, that's okay, but for now, we would recommend keeping them in. Remember, the downtown sub-area, I think the council is interested in relooking at it soon, which may be as early next year. So you may be revisiting these projects a lot sooner than you think. So 185th improvements. Basically, at this point, that's sidewalks along the corridor here, which would be our transit corridor. So in terms of driving lanes, we envision a 3-lane facility in the future. There's parking now, but one of our concerns about that street is its emergency response route, the primary one, when they come westbound. And when there's parking and only 2 lanes and there's a bus and there's a lot of traffic, we worry about that. So we're working with the police and fire to make sure they're in constant communication, but we think eventually it'll look like a 3-lane facility without parking, but we would need wide sidewalks, and that's primarily what that project is, to put the wide sidewalks to support transit. Main Street Enhancement Phase 2, we finished Phase 1 of the Main Street project between Bothell Way and 102nd, and redid that whole streetscape, and this was the second phase to go from 102nd to 104th. It's primarily an economic project, it's not a capacity project. You could call it a safety project because the sidewalks, there isn't an intent to put in an on-street bike lane or anything there. It's more like a greenway, so it's more of an economic project. 104th Avenue Northeast bike lanes, keep that one in mind. That would put bike lanes on 104th between 185th and Main Street, if you can picture that. It's got 2 lanes, parking on one side only, buildings right up to it on the east side. It'd be quite difficult. Right now, our bike plan shows it as a greenway. I'm not sure that matches a greenway. It's very busy. The $4 million I put there was on the assumption that maybe on one side of the road, we would put a shared use path, which is kind of weird, but again, unless we want to spend a lot of money on that thing, it would be very difficult to put a cycle track on both sides and sidewalks, especially with the built environment there. Bike parking program kind of speaks for itself in downtown, put places where people are riding in to go to work, that there are places that they can secure their bike. And the Valley View Road Bike and Ped Improvement Project, that's a way to try to get campus kids to downtown without going to Beardsley, especially if they're on the south end of the campus. It's envisioned more as a greenway, which works actually really well past the cemetery. I've walked that in middle of the road, not even worried about a car. As you get closer to Kaysner, it gets a little bit more difficult. We'd have to look at that, but the thought there is to finish the sidewalk at least and put a greenway there. The problem with that one is on the campus side, it's a huge hill, and that's just an impediment to people using that as a path. So, but again, it's in our plan, and we recommend we keeping it there for now. So Canyon Park came up with a lot of projects, and again, it was the more recent one. We just finished that in 2019. There is a left turn lane addition there for congestion internal to the park. 219th Place is primarily a private opportunity. We would never build that. So if the Phillips property, which is on the west side of 527, north of I-405, that big complex there, the backside is 9th Avenue. If they really redeveloped at some point, we would allow them to connect to 9th Avenue after we improve it. North Creek Trail, there's a small piece of North Creek Trail between 20th and 17th that's not quite finished yet. There is a developer out there. We hope that we'll do some part of it, but we also somehow have to connect the two up. So that's that project. That might include a bridge across North Creek itself. And then the Canyon Park Shared Use Path is actually on the north side of 220th, from North Creek Trail at 20th, going to 26th and 29th to try to feed into North Creek Trail. And again, still private parcel. Not sure how we'd proceed with that at this point. And then there are 3 internal intersections in Canyon Park that we would need to address in full build-out. If things happen in 20 years the way the sub-area plan predicts it, they would have to be addressed somehow. So there is some money in there to do that. 26th, 29th is, you know how you get to Canyon Park off of 228, the one entrance? That's 26th and 29th, and it's a 5-lane facility. We don't think we need a 5-lane facility. We would like to road diet that and put in protected bike lanes. Again, it's not our roads at this point, so it's a plan, but if ever they become our roads, that would be something we would look at. And in 228 Bothell Highway, that's the biggest, worst intersection in Bothell, and what we'd like to do is just have some funding there, there's $200,000, to look at ways we can improve capacity, ways we can improve safety. It's a really long walk for people to cross across it. If we have bike facilities going east-west, and now we're gonna have one north, it's gonna be difficult to get across that. But at the same time, you have a lot of cars that have to get through it. So how do you combine everything? Is there anything we can do? There's some huge ideas out there, but again, it's all kind of a balance of things. So that one's primarily a study at this point.
And we have a couple of new commissioners who may not be familiar with the fact that the internal roads in Canyon Park are privately owned.
Right. Yep.
That was privately developed, so those aren't city streets.
Yep. Thank you for that. So this is a map Kendra provided. So this is 527 going north. This is 524 up here. Sorry, I got a delay on my mouse. So this is Canyon Park, pretty much most of it's on this side. This is Phillips right here. So you can see that, you know, those Canyon Park projects come from a plan that, you know, wasn't done by itself. It interacts with the land use, it interacts with the comments and everything we got in. So again, our recommendation is, although they're non-capacity projects, let's keep them in and let's go through a process if we're going to change them or get rid of them, because we went through a public process, we should really do that again. So these are also 2 that we would like to get input on. They're kind of interesting ones. So they're kind of like placeholders. So we primarily study the main arterials in our roadway and the intersections and see how they perform. And we use that as kind of to judge how well the system is working. We can't model every single local road intersection and everything. It's just too costly and we just can't do that. But we do know of some intersections that are not performing well, and we may want to look at. And these 2 line items just give us some funding to try to address some of those. As an example, I'll start with the downtown one, which is a bigger number. So right now, Kaysner, Main Street, Beardsley, 104, that intersection, 4-way stop, no matter what we look at it, it fails as a 4-way stop. So you might say, well, that's a capacity issue. Kind of, it's a congestion issue. If you talk to my friend Rayed here, he says congestion often becomes a safety issue. We have many people calling us and saying it's not safe because people are in a rush because they've had to wait so long, and by the time they get there, they're not going to wait for me to cross. So things like that happen, and if we do want to address it, this would give us some funding to look at it, either fully or potentially go after a grant, because there are grants out there, that safety grants for intersections that we could compete for. In downtown, there's a couple more. On 185th, that's where the buses are going to be. And if you can picture 200 buses in each direction every day, plus cars, plus emergency vehicles coming. There are a couple intersections there. 102nd, which is a T intersection. It's great for transit, but if you're coming home across the 102nd Avenue Bridge, you'll never get a left turn. So at some point, people may want us to address that. 101st out here is going to be a 2-way stop, not a 4-way stop. Again, for transit, we're going to put an RRP, 4 of them out here for crossings. But again, if it becomes a little bit problematic, we might want to drop a pedestrian-oriented signal there, low level, to get a 4-way stop again, but allow transit to go through because they can press a button to get priority. So things like that in the downtown area. If we keep Main Street closed or open, it actually affects one of our intersections here, and we're still trying to figure out how to improve it such that it doesn't affect transit. But that would give us a little bit of resources to do things like that and adjust with things. The citywide one you would think would be bigger, but right now we've only identified maybe one definitely that we think might be problematic in the future, and that's Brickyard Road and 160th. It's not signalized at this point, so it is a big intersection. We'd have to work with WashDOT, but that's one of them that we're looking at. We are going to put actually a signalized pedestrian crossing. Sound Transit's going to pay for that. But from a car point of view, if you're coming up and you want to take a left turn, it's kind of a challenge at this point. So, all right. Should I pause? I'm throwing a lot at you, I know.
Commissioners, questions? Yes.
Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you so much for presenting all the data, and thank you for trusting us with all the data. I really appreciate it. I do have a question about the debate we're having about whether to prioritize partial bike lanes in more places versus full bike lanes in just a few places. It sounds to me that having shared use paths, especially shared use paths on one side of the road, could be in themselves dangerous because you have people and bikes going in two different directions. So my question is it worth doing fewer but more complete bike paths with the idea that we could perhaps build in those bike paths later? Or is there no later? Is this the only time we have to make those improvements because of other improvements happening?
No, again, this is a snapshot. This is a plan. So, again, to me, that's a great question because it's not specific to a project. It's a general question. So that's one of the things we're presenting here, and we did and showed you one way to go through this. So definitely what we could say is for 20th and 214th, we don't want shared use paths. We wanted cycle tracks. And then we would figure out what it was, our original cost estimate was. We'd beef those up. And then what I would show you later is, okay, which ones are we going to cross off now? Because we won't have funding for that. And that's certainly an option. I mean, that's the whole exercise here. Thought we'd do it this way to at least give you something to look at and talk about as an option. If we just did it immediately and said, oh, this is our standard plan and this is what you get, you won't go through that conversation. So I wanted to make sure we had that conversation and you might come up with something kind of in between, which is also fine. So what I would recommend is after this round of any questions, because I know I'm throwing a lot at you, there's a few more that are similar and you can kind of see where that line is drawn. And you can see that if we have to cut projects, which ones you would have to probably, if you want to be true to the scoring system, we're all trying to be objective, which ones would be the lower ones and which ones we would not, we would have to drop off our funding plan. I think that's a great question. Yep.
Commissioner Robson?
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the way we're displaying your data here. I see that you've got across the top here, projects, points, cost, capacity, safety. Are capacity, safety, I think pedestrian, bike, transit, resiliency, freight, are those things that they're receiving points on, or are they?
No.
Can you explain what those are?
Yep, great
Okay.
question. So what we tried to do is not, those aren't your rating point systems. Right. But what we wanted to do, especially, let me go back. I know because we struggle with capacity projects. So we call this vehicle capacity projects. And if you just left it at that, you'd say, why are we funding vehicle capacity projects? But if you look at it, it's not just addressing capacity. It's addressing safety issues because they're along high-risk corridors. They're installing sidewalks. They're installing protected bike lanes. They're on transit routes, so access is important. One project addresses resiliency, and a lot of them address freight. So it's not a point system. We just wanted to show you that in a visual way that These weren't just capacity projects. A lot of the funding, a lot of the cost in that $117 million is not that extra lane. It's really actually the 5-foot planter strip, the bike facility behind it, and the sidewalks on both sides of the roadway. There's also things like we're putting in 3 fish passage culverts in there, which you can say is resiliency, because the flow and the flooding won't be there. So there are a lot of things that are really ramping up some of these corridor costs, and like I said, they're big costs. But we wanted to make sure we let you know they weren't just addressing cars and capacity. It's really that whole project. Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Commissioner Lever?
My question is around the wetlands, and I don't know the background about what happened with one of the controversial projects that the chair mentioned before, but with everything that we kind of know about the environment, and then like the cost of maintaining a road on a wetland, and basically like we're kind of going against nature. When it comes to really investing in building roads on a wetland, like what's the rationale behind that? Like why are we even still considering something like that, knowing what we know?
So again, with Canyon Park, and those 2 projects came out of Canyon Park sub-area plan, which basically what the sub-area plan showed was 527 is kind of a mess. Regionally, everybody's trying to come down there to get to I-405. Part of the problem, though, is our regional growth center, most of which is on the east side of the road north of I-405. There's really only a couple entrances into that. And so everybody has to use the 2 worst roads. It's 228th and 527. So these 2 projects were actually thought of to try to get access from the north without having to go on 527, and also from the west side using 9th rather than 527. We would have loved to go to the east, but if you start looking at the grades, it's virtually impossible. There are some trails there that people, I think, mountain bike and maybe, hike up, but there's no way we can get that way. There's a couple more alternatives on the north side, but they would be going through existing neighborhoods. And again, so wetlands, neighborhoods, I think that was kind of the discussion at that point in the sub-area plan. I agree, they're not ideal, which is one of the also ways that I'm saying that there's an order of work that we perceive, and some of those would probably be later, if necessary kind of things at the end. I personally would like to do 527 first, because that would increase 527. We have places that have 2 lanes and 3 lanes, and the 3 lanes goes away. And then we have some safety issues up north and capacity issues just in turning movements. If we can get more people through 527, then we don't have to really do 20th and 214th until we get to that point where, hey, if you want more people in the regional growth center, you have to do something. And if by then we feel like maybe the wetlands isn't the solution, we can open the door and see what else we can do. At the time, we couldn't come up with anything else that there was available that could be done.
Other commissioners?
Yes, Sarah Gustafson here. I do remember those discussions, Commissioner Lover, about the 20th Avenue and 214th, and I was pretty clearly against those. I do understand that there is a need for that connectivity. Have we considered the impact of induced demand? Because I'm wondering, it would be not ideal to build those to impact the wetland and then have the traffic be just as bad as it was before within the matter of a few years.
So what I would recommend at that point is reopen looking at Canyon Park and not do it as part of this process. Mm-hmm. Because again, a very thorough Canyon Park outreach process went, and I think reopening that deserves similar. And that's something that, again, these are not anything in the near future that we have. So if it's 2 or 3 years down the road, I think there's time to do that and reassess things like that.
I think I really appreciate that comment about induced demand. That's something we think a lot about, and particularly in a world where we're trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. That's why when you look at this project list, you'll see heavy emphasis towards providing a more complete system for people walking and biking so that they have those options. There's a lot of gaps in your system today where those options don't exist. And yes, for every car you take off the road, you do provide more capacity for another one. And that is just really, I'd say that's tied to what a vibrant area this is. This is a place where people want to live. So what we're trying to do is, on the whole, if we can reduce that VMT, that greenhouse gas emission per person trip, that then we're winning. We are on the whole helping, even if it might feel like we're adding more trips onto our system. We are on the whole, when we think about it, beyond just the city of Bothell, if we think about it more on a regional scale, we're doing the right things. And then also part and parcel thinking about those TDM programs that we have for both Canyon Park and downtown and really leaning into those.
But those comments are great because I think we'll track them. And those are probably things we'll pass on to the council as well. And said, hey, these two projects were flagged because although they're in sub-area plan, there's a desire to readdress those things. But again, a recommendation is we should go through a certain process to do that. And I don't think the comp plan is that process.
Yeah, I'll just add one more comment about the TDM program for the Canyon Park. We're currently working on that as we speak, literally. We're just waiting for providing the incentives and all of that and trying to move people out. That's exactly what you're saying, is that, if you don't have the vehicles, then we don't have to go that way. We can always drop it off at the future. But, as part of the traffic modeling exercise, we looked at the traffic volumes pre-COVID, after COVID. We determined, from COVID, there is about 40, almost 50% of the people started working from home. A year later, now we're at 40%. Well, so the big question is, are the companies going to go back and work, in the office 5 times a week? All of that really does affect that demand that we will be addressing. And nobody can really predict the future of what would the companies use and, the overall traffic models. So we will get more information about it within the next couple of years. And after hopefully a successful project from the TDM program, we don't even need to go that way. So fingers crossed. We'll see.
We'll find another alternative if we can. Yeah, which is, at the time was, yeah. Okay, any other?
I have two
Yep.
questions. When you look at these, what I'll call partial section developments, putting them on one side, and I recognize right-of-way acquisition is a significant cost, but do you try to preserve right-of-way so that if in the future you want to do that other side, it can happen?
I guess I would say let's say we had an existing right-of-way
Yep.
and we didn't fill it up, I don't think we'd get rid of it. These two projects are new projects, there's no right-of-way at all
Yeah,
in
no,
in certain portions.
not particularly those, but some of the others where you're doing,
I don't think we would give the right-of-way away. I think the hard part would be convincing somebody that after you have this facility, it's still ranking high before this other one that doesn't have any facility or a very nominal facility. I think that would be more of the issue, where now that you've done it, where does it rank now? And I suspect it wouldn't rank very high because people would be pointing at it saying, hey, you have a beautiful facility on one side of the road, we know you got to cross it, but there's many out here that don't have facilities at all, so. Yeah.
which leads to my second question, crossing. There are a lot of places where we have segments of sidewalks, and they end, and the other side of, and the one that I've walked many times that's particularly galling is 15th, where the sidewalk will end, and there's a sidewalk on the other side, and that's a fast road. It's a straight road, people drive fast across. If we could look at where these segments terminate and try to facilitate crossing, I think that'd make a lot of sense.
Yes.
Even 19th, there's some of that,
Yes.
where it's on one side and not the other, and there's not a good crossing.
Yep.
So, and that seems like it would be a relatively inexpensive safety upgrade to put down crosswalk.
Yes, in certain locations. I've looked at 15th, there are also still gaps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, So you could connect it all up as best you could, and you might be 70% there. You'd still have a gap that doesn't have a sidewalk on either side. One of the things we want to do after this comp plan sets the table is relook at our transportation design standards. And one of the things we're trying to do is look very closely at all our arterials, which is 15th is an arterial as well, and try to come up with the cross-section that best fits that. It takes time and effort because that cross-section varies. I mean, you look at 15th and it goes, right away it goes like this, and sidewalk here, there's wide shoulder on this side, and it varies quite a bit. What we would like to do is, a couple things is be able to at least plan for what we think would be the best fit there, most economic, get the best bang for your buck. Also give predictability for our reviewers when permits come in and they have to do, there's always the question, was it an 11-foot lane, is it a 12-foot lane, is it 3 lanes, is it 5 lanes, what kind of sidewalk? We want all those questions to go away. We want to have like a plan for that, but it takes a lot of effort. But that's something we're going to try to at least start to do come later this fall and early 2025, update our design standards to help with that. I think we will continue to look on trying to get connectivity as best we can, even if 15th doesn't make it into the whole corridor list. But again, it's going to come down to how many resources we have, and in 15th's case, how many practical crossings would it take to kind of stitch them all together and things like that. But those are great ideas, and I think those are some of the things we will continue to look at, yes.
Well, and there's one on 19th where I walk frequently, where there's a trail that terminates at the road.
Yep.
And there's a curb-protected sidewalk anyway on the other side, but you got to cross.
Yep.
35 miles an hour coming down the hill.
Yep.
Nobody ever stops for pedestrians.
Right. Yep.
So,
Agreed.
thank you. Commissioner Sills, and then Commissioner Lieber.
The trail versus the dedicated bike lane, are there differences in speed limits?
See, that's a great question. With electric bikes, there's
Right.
opens a whole range of things. So from a safety point of view. So yes, I think that is a downside because of shared use trail. The other thing for me, shared use trail is visually impaired. Because just walking down, they're going to be on one edge, which is okay, but then they have to trust other people are going to avoid them. So, like Bothell Way, at least we have it designated, and we'll have kind of like a textured strip so that visually impaired can walk along that edge but not be in the bike lane. And then there will be a dedicated bike lane 2 directions. So at least you separate it. So I totally agree that's more beneficial. That's our assumption at this point. I'm not sure. It could be that Bothell Way, we see people going 45 miles per hour next to that little 6-inch strip, and everybody's freaking out, whereas the shared use trail like the Burke Gilman, people go fast, but people also know it's crowded. So it kind of works a little bit. So I don't have a solid answer.
Can you legally put in a speed limit for something like that?
I think we could, sure, yeah.
It's just a question of
Can,
if
right?
people would follow it,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
not like a vehicle. It's not, I don't think that's regulated somehow. I think I don't know if it's enforceable. That would be the difficult
Yeah,
thing.
okay.
Disproportionately.
Yeah. So I will tell you, we're doing our best to try to predict everything and bike facilities and everything, and I'm not a biker like some people, so it gets very interesting as well as on crossings, and you see everything under the sun and how best to do it. So we're doing our best to start somewhere, and my suspicion again is we're going to see some facilities come in, and we will get comments coming back on people loving it, some people not, and can you do this better? So it might evolve. Again, living document. Design standards are living documents. 3 to 5 years, I'm hoping we as a city, we kind of figure out what we like and what we don't like. Yeah.
Commissioner Lever here. Can you please remind me why we have the sidewalk gaps again? Like there's a sidewalk and then you don't have sidewalk and then again the sidewalk, the pedestrian. Like, can you remind
Yeah.
me the reason behind that again?
So, as I was telling you before, we rely on development to help us. If we don't have development, it's a significant chunk of our public facilities. So, you walk down the street here, right now, you can go today, and you'll see old sidewalk, and then you'll see beautiful new sidewalk. And in some cases where there's no sidewalk, you'll see beautiful new sidewalk and nothing on either end. People don't like the way that looks, but if we say, oh, you don't have to do it because you're only one parcel, well, in 20 years, there'll be 7 parcels, and then we will fill in the gaps. But if we say, no, individually, you don't have to do anything, city will have to do it by itself, and we can't afford it. So you'll never see a sidewalk there. So yes, it's very incremental, and what I'm trying to tell everybody is that's how we get things done over a period of time. In the short term, it looks really funky, and then for bike facilities, you go off and you come back on. But there's a method to the madness, because in 20 years, a significant percentage of our public facilities will be put in by developers.
Also, it helps visualization for the developer. When they come in and they see there is a sidewalk section new, when I come in to buy that property, city must be requiring me to do that. So at least in their mind, they're calculating that as part of their purchase agreement. Whatever it is.
Okay, so active mode projects. So these are the ones that we took our bike, ped, safety, resiliency, and we tried to combine them wherever they kind of overlapped each other and it made sense. So the biggest one, and probably one of the highest scoring one, is 228th Street, southeast and southwest corridor. And it would be from the west city limits all the way to the east city limits. Okay. We originally looked at it of just redoing everything, and it was a really, really high cost. Okay. So then what we did was we looked at it and said, where are there sidewalk and a on-street bike lane existing? We wouldn't do anything right now. If there was no sidewalk, we'd put everything in for that stretch. If there was no bike lane, we'd put everything in for that stretch. And that's the number you see is 114 million for city limit to city limit. It's not a capacity project. We might do some safety things like access management, meaning we might make people make right turns out and right turns in rather than left turns out. We might redo an intersection a little bit. I think there's one right turn lane into Canyon Park off of 228th at 29th that we want to put in for capacity. That's it. The rest of it is all ped bike safety. There's also some drainage issues on 228th, which comes under resiliency that we would take care of if it makes sense when we're there. The second one is 102nd Avenue shared use path, and that's from basically East Riverside Drive all the way to Main Street, excluding the bridge. The bridge is a separate project, but we would put a shared use path on one side of the road. That's a very narrow road. I mean, it would be great to put a sidewalk on the east side, but there's really not much on the east side. And from a bang for your buck, it's probably better we'd stick to the west side. And that, we already got a design grant, and it scored high, which is cool. So this is where the scoring becomes interesting. So when you get to the 70s, 67, 68s, there's a lot of them. The Sammamish River Ped and Bike Bridge was brought up as a project. It's in our current draft CFP, so we're currently funding it, but you can see it's 70 points. East Riverside Drive Trail, I'll go back to the other one. East Riverside Drive Trail doesn't actually score that high. Not sure, but it doesn't. It's a little bit lower, but again, it's in our current CFP, and so we're keeping it in at this point. 96th is the Burke-Gilman Trail. You know, if you're coming down Juanita Way, if you're headed north toward 522 and you want to get to the Burke-Gilman Trail, how do you do it? If you want to do it safely, you go all the way to the intersection and cross, but nobody does that. So there's been a lot of action to try to get us to put a safe crossing. It's not easy. There's no sidewalk and no room on the park side. And if we put a crossing where there's the driveway, it's on a curve where people are trying to merge after they come off 522, and it's not very safe. So we're thinking about solutions, and at least we want to do a study. And if we come up with a solution that's not a huge cost, we might be able to afford it in our safety program or our, bike or ped program or something. So that's, the PROG means we're going to look at it through our program and see if we can do something. So the shaded ones below with the NF not funded, those are the ones that don't make the cut. So again, if we want to readdress how we're doing some of the other ones, like let's say 228th, we wanted to just build the whole thing and make it beautiful from city limit to city limit, that might go up to 160 million. We might have to cut off a couple of those projects. And that's just a trade-off. Okay. I'll show you some of the others and we can go through and we can talk about them. So all of these are also, they're in the 63s, 58s, not quite as high, but they're all ones that we would all love to see. 100th and 19th, we just talked about. 15th, we just talked about. Holly Hills, it would be great to put some sort of path all the way from the business park up to Holly Hills. Right now, there's kind of a narrow shared use path behind a curb. It would be great to put a separated facility and everything. 7th and 88th is a north-south road. Most of it doesn't have much at all. So again, all of these are great projects. There's just not enough funding there. And again, think about how long they are. And remember, I told you $5,000 per side, and start adding it all up. Basically, they're all in tens of millions of dollars, unfortunately. Let me go a few more before we talk a little bit more. So these started off as safety projects, and you can see they scored pretty high. We had high, one of our priorities was safety, so they got those points. 120th Avenue, 1.2 million. You can see these aren't very large. There are going to be some safety improvements on the roadway, but they're not like building sidewalk along the whole corridor or anything. The one that is more expensive is 524 and Maltby Road. We think there's a lot of potential there, especially if we can team up with WashDOT when they repave. There's a lot of shoulder there, and we're looking to see if we can put a shared use path on the south side. And if we can put a shared use path on the south side, the north side also doesn't have a complete sidewalk to get to the businesses by 527. So we would have to put a pedestrian crossing at some point, which is kind of dicey right now. But if we redo that whole roadway, beef up an intersection and look at it, we might be able to make a safe crossing. So that's that project in a nutshell. 522 is essentially trying to put sidewalk in front of Yakima Fruit Market. And then the Bothell Highway, there are ramped crossings on Bothell Highway 527 of I-405. We're going to take care of one of them, but there's 3 others that if you want to walk across that, it's doesn't feel very good. So that's one we would want to look at. That one's interesting because it's always, to me, it's a question whether you really want bikes and peds crossing that interchange or do you really want them crossing the bridge. So it's kind of a push and pull. But again, it's not a huge cost because if we put flashing beacons and things just to light it up a little, make it a little safer, it's not millions of dollars. So it's part of a program. And then the last thing out of Red's hard work was most of these are going to be funded through the resiliency program, the new program that we recommended, and they'll do things like backup power for signals, flood detection, traffic camera systems. There's some down trees that we need to work with private, not down trees, but trees that have a tendency to fall on Winnetka Way that we would want to work with the private owner. Adaptive signal system we could complete or finish up, and those would all be handled through the resiliency program over a period of time because they're not large ticket items and they can be done incrementally. 120th Avenue Park Creek, that's at 195th and 120th, that typically floods on very, very bad flooding days. The storm utility is going to do more work there, so it should improve it. It might not eliminate it completely, but they're working on it to try to reduce it. And then there are 3 fairly big ticket items that are not as high priority because there's some redundancy in our transportation system that we're not going to fund at this point. I think that's it. So I think what I would do, let's just go through this. So what we did was we mapped the projects, or Kendra's staff mapped the projects, and we tried to put them on the high-risk corridors. And, you know, we have a project here, we have that safety project and the sidewalks and everything along here. Those are probably our two worst corridors. Downtown gets a little bit of attention here. There's some safety things going on here, I think. So we just wanted to overlap it and see where it's at with some of our safety issues, and it kind of fits well. And again, in your packet, I'm going to point out that 240th is shown as a project, and like I just showed you on the table, it's not funded at this point. Didn't make the cut. So when we talked about equity, we had our priorities, and we created the access priority, and we used that. But in addition to that, we wanted to map it. So this is like a socioeconomic vulnerability map, and we put it on there, and we kind of looked at it. Couple other things that we noticed, like this one looked kind of empty. You know, our project is here on East Riverside Drive. We have a little bit of safety project here. We might have that bridge crossing here. But what we did find out when we looked at the communities, the cost, the prices of homes and everything, most of the lower costs were in that corner of that block. So I think we're okay there. It would be nice to do a little bit more on the Holly Hill side and the business park. We do have some sidewalk projects and safety projects, but not that much here. All the rest of them seem to be, you know, touched and at least distributed a little bit. And then the other map, this is Riot's map, which I thought was cool. Although we call it a resiliency of flood map as well as a city critical facilities, the other thing that's on here are actually manufactured home parks, which give us some information. So you can kind of see where some of these projects are relative to where those communities are. And again, it seems we can't hit every single one. There are a few that I think we're a little bit away from, but it's kind of cool. 524, there's one up here. 228, we're doing work down here. Lake Pleasant's right here. We're doing some work over there. East Riverside Drive, if we can get connectivity to Regional Trail, there's a bunch here. So again, maybe Holly Hills, you know, maybe on 15th right here. Yeah. And that's what I have. So at that point, it would be questions.
Commissioner Weaver.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to thank you for the maps. I so appreciated them. Like, they were super helpful, and I forgot to say that earlier, but they made me smile. I'm like, yeah, this makes so much sense.
I think it was a great tool.
Thank you.
So a lot of information. Kendra's busy writing things. I guess a couple things that, I mean, you guys tell me, but there's a couple things that we talked a little bit about flexibility, some of the type of facilities, especially for bikes. Is that open for consideration or not? So I would love feedback on that. 228, that whole corridor, if we build the whole thing at once, it's a huge cost. So what we did was we're going to build only where there's not a sidewalk and an on-street bike facility. So I would say, if you're riding, I'm going to guess, on one side of the road, there's certain areas that 70% of the time you'd be on a new facility, but 30% of the time you'd be on street. Okay. The trade-off for that is if you want to do that and it's high ranking, then again, we have to look for other projects where we feel they're not as high priority, and we could do that. I think those are probably the biggest questions. Yeah.
So, Commissioner, questions, comments? Commissioner Weaver?
I don't have a question, but more so a comment that goes back sort of to the engagement component. So I can provide my opinion, and this is something that we're not going to resolve tonight, but I really look for opportunities where we can let the public know that these conversations are happening. I mean, I'm following you on your social media. You know, I don't know if you have a TikTok account, but I think government agencies are really using that more and more. So maybe the Planning Commission can have a little hey, we're going to be discussing these projects and making sure that, you know, it's not up to us. You know, when I think about policy and systems, I know, you know, people make the policy, like we are the system, and it makes me I have that responsibility to make sure that we know that it's not about what I believe, but it's more so, did we hear the community? And there was a very comprehensive engagement process, which I totally get. But oftentimes we don't get to hear from those who most need it. So I just welcome the opportunity to hear more about how we're leveraging technology, aka TikTok and social media, to get people to provide their input more in a way that's easier and maybe more engaging, so it's not so rigid. So that's kind of my comment here.
So I'll go over this a little bit on next steps, but although overall I don't think we have a huge outreach other than the public hearings and everything, from the transportation side, we kind of made a promise that we would come back with a project list and share it with the public, so we were going to do that. Now, the deal is, it took a lot of effort to get here. If it substantially changes, we're not sure we can change much, because, again, the balancing act of revenue and what, but we can certainly document that, because again, it's a living document, and we can say, hey, when we closed the door, because we had to, because we didn't have time, these were the outstanding issues and some things that people wanted us to revisit when we opened it again, 5 years later, 3 years later, whatever. Those are the kinds of questions we're probably going to ask, things like that. And we're also asking you, because we can modify this somewhat, we can play around with things, but there are probably some things like Canyon Park projects. I would not recommend taking those 2 projects off without a process. But we can certainly say, hey, Planning Commission wants that process, because at some point before we start these 2 projects, because maybe there's another way, or maybe we need to be sure that we've done everything we can before we have to do those projects.
I've noticed a lot of, or a number of anyway, fish passage projects on Swamp Creek. Not so many on North Creek. Anything there? Any reason? Is it funding or?
So North Creek, there actually is one we're not doing. It's not North Creek. We're doing an offshoot of North Creek. I'm trying to picture with North Creek. I think there's one, well, that's Park Creek. I think mostly for North Creek, we have bridges. And there's not much we're going to do with those bridges. I think most of them are okay. There's one bridge we're having a problem with, which was listed on his resiliency list. And that's the one on North Creek Parkway North. And it's actually part of the levee system. And what's happening there is, because the levee system is constrained, and right after the bridge it widens, what happens when water slows down, it drops all the sediment. So it's dropping the sediment right under the bridge. So our bridge is about this much clearance right now. And at some point, we have to make a decision whether we think that's safe, because from a maintenance point of view, we're not putting anybody under there. From a traffic point of view, the thought would be we could do without it. Emergency services would love it there, but again, I think they're okay without it. I don't know how the business market would be with that, but from the city's point of view, rather than reinvesting in a higher, taller, longer bridge, we'd probably just somehow take it down, maybe. That's one I know on North Creek. The other one north of that, we just replaced the bridge on 240th not too long ago because it failed. So we put that one in. I can't think of any other constraint on North Creek itself. Yeah, I'd have to look. We can look. There are many other smaller streams we have fish passage culverts. So there's one on 35th right now with, we're actually in design we're going to do. It's between 228th and 240th. There are a couple on 228 that 228 project would address. There's a couple of them there. Park Creek is being addressed, especially at its where it hits Sammamish River. I think our stormwater group is looking at that because that's a constraint. So there's other creeks, but not North Creek so much, I think.
And then the 527 project, there are some crossings there. Is it going to be?
There's one crossing, and that's a bridge, and it's washouts. So I think the road is wide enough there. Knock on wood, we don't have to actually touch that bridge. Like I said, there's 3 lanes intermittently, and I think that just happens to be where there is. I'm not sure. I have to check that, though.
All right, thank you. Other comments, questions? Yes, Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. Regarding feedback on bike lanes versus, you wanted to know if there's any flexibility on that. And I always vote in favor of flexibility because it doesn't mean that we don't get the full array of what is needed. It just means that if we can modify a little bit, you guys have that space. And so if you wanted our input on that, that is my input. I vote on the side of flexibility.
Commissioner Lever, I second that.
Great, thanks.
If I may, Commissioner Westerbeck, I was going to say something similar, kind of the, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because if we can make, for example, I'm thinking of like the 228th example, the one side, you know, getting it safe, even if we have some issues that we have to deal with that we're all used to dealing with on the Sammamish River Trail, for example. It's fine, we know how to get along, like you said. I was curious, engineering question, are we limited to, like, I think, aren't the new rail trail standards like 12 feet or something, where in the old days it was narrower, 8 or 10 or something like, they keep getting a little wider. Is it possible you say, okay, we can only do one side, and obviously it's gonna be intermittent sections of old and new, but it's a little wider, so you can dedicate a textured path for the sight impaired and the walking or something like that. Even if it's just the rubber, you know, striping or something like that. Or just, you know, you see sometimes the stripe lanes where the bikes get, you know, 3 or 4 feet. It's not very wide, but they're trying to, or attempting to sort of keep people in a lane within a shared space. Is that being thought about? I know that's in the weeds and you guys aren't designing it yet, so I'm just curious if that kind of comes up when you think, well, I can only do one side, but how do we use that landscape or that right away?
Yeah. So 228, by the way, is cycle track each direction.
I know, but you said we may have to do the compromise and do I have that
Not
wrong?
on 228.
Not on 228th, okay. Maybe
Just
it is-
240th and
Okay.
214th, I believe.
I'm wrong then, so.
Okay,
But you said
but-
there were some places where
Yes.
we put in the bike plan.
Yep.
We may have to amend it if we were saying, hey, we can do one side, but we can't do both. Would you like to do just one right now?
I think we put that as a placeholder as things we look at, and that's part of the design standard thing as well. As an example, Bothell Way, the one we're currently working on, the desire is 10 foot for the bikes. There are some pinch points that we might get a little narrower, 8 feet. So we gave them a minimum. Sometimes you give them a minimum to do the whole thing. You say, well, that was a minimum. That wasn't what we wanted. Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's to be expected.
Yeah, I think we want to look at that, and I think, yes, there are a couple issues with that. We all say, can we do that for now, and then later improve it? And just like I said, what happens when you do it then becomes, when are you coming back?
That's done for 20 years. We're not going to look at it for a long time.
Right,
yeah.
because there are
40
other
years.
people down the line that are waiting for their facilities.
You just did
and
that,
if you-
yeah.
So
Right.
that's the conundrum we have. The other conundrum is, we always get talked about, can the sidewalks be asphalt? Do you need to put the planter strips? And if we have to, we don't put planter strips. We like to because it's safer, it feels better as well. But typically we justify it by some sort of constraint. You know, there's a wetland, there's a steep slope or whatever.
Sure.
If we don't do it to design standards and keep kind of a quality at a certain level, then you start getting into equity questions too. Why is
Yeah.
my neighborhood, why did they get concrete sidewalks and we
Oh, yeah.
have asphalt and my values aren't, you know, so those questions also come up. So
See that, yeah.
it is kind of a balancing act, but one of the things with the design standards that we want to do is kind of look at that. Because there are certain cases where I think it's obvious that you'll get much more savings if you do one versus the other.
Yeah.
The other one is Meridian, if you guys can picture that between 228th
Yep.
and 240th. The road is all the way to the west of the right-of-way. There's a huge amount of right-of-way on the east side. So to me, there's no facility whatsoever there, shared use path. Why would I build on both sides if, free right-of-way on one side?
Right, yeah.
So things
Make the
like
most
that,
of it, yeah.
we would look, but it takes a lot of time to look at each corridor.
Yeah.
And many corridors are not that simple. They change halfway.
Sure.
But we will log that down and try to work our way.
I was just curious, you
Yeah.
know, I'm on the internet like everyone, and I see there's cities all over the world doing really fantastic things now with multimodal, and you guys see it all, you know, it's your job. And so I see how like, oh, look what they did there, look what they did there, and how they divided up the right of way, and they got creative with this or that, and
I know.
obviously the things that the Dutch are doing, or, you know, gold standard and stuff, but we're seeing a lot of cool stuff in America too. So I was just curious, like, well, if you've only got so much right of way,
I think that's
to
a
get
great,
creative thinking about how
Yeah.
you use it, yeah.
I'm always open to ideas, and I think that's a great question. I went to Japan, and
Yeah,
in Japan, they have,
masters at it, yeah.
they don't have 12-foot sidewalks, they have 10-foot sidewalks. And they, right next to the roadway, and everybody uses it. But, and then there's a little railing that I think if you hit it with a bike, you go over.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
I've seen the
you know,
pictures,
the
yeah.
drivers are driving differently. They have smaller cars, the roads are very narrow.
And sometimes the road is the path too, right? And everyone's moving slowly because the buildings are right there and the older neighborhoods.
Yeah, but I saw a lot of this mixed use in one area. And, then, you know,
Yeah.
the business is right there, so you open your front door and a bike might be going by.
Yeah,
But I think it's a cultural thing too. They're
Yeah.
riding differently.
yeah,
They're
totally.
riding to get to a train station and they're not going 30 miles per hour, whereas American, we want to get there. So, you know,
Right.
we go speeding down that trail. So to me, those are the other things we got to think about.
Feel free to bring those Japanese ideas to Bothell anytime you want. We
But
love
to me, it's also a culture. You
Yeah.
have to, it's
Oh, yeah,
not
totally.
just the facility. You have to
time.
change how people are using everything.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Be a sea change.
Right.
Agreed.
Are e-bikes resulting in any rethinking of the standards? They're bigger, they're faster, they take up a little more room.
That's where I get nervous on the shared use path.
Yeah.
I'd rather have them separated, but I also think like, it's hard because I'm gonna use Bothell Way again. We're separating the bikes, but there's no physical, in an ideal world, you'd have a vehicle traveling 5-foot planter strip, you'd have the two-way bike, you'd have another planter strip, and then you'd have a sidewalk. You know, the cost is huge, but that's ideal, because if the bikes want to go 30 miles per hour, I don't care, I'm walking on the sidewalk, right? But in our world, we have to balance things. So we're putting the sidewalk next to the bike, we're separating it by a visual thing, on a texture thing. You're right, how do we slow bikes down? That might become the problem in 15 years when we have this wonderful grid system. That might be a problem we have to deal with. But it also gives us flexibility, because I can narrow the bike lane a little, and if there's not somebody using the sidewalk, I can pass on the sidewalk. So, I mean, it's kind of this balance thing, and I think I told you guys, I think the next 2-3 years, as these facilities start popping up, hopefully we'll get a consensus of what's kind of working, I think. Yeah.
I think the only thing I would add, just kind of two things. One, e-bikes are great. They're getting people to get out of their cars that, historically would be in their cars. Case in point, I bike to Seattle pretty frequently. I would never do that on a standard bike. The other thing we do want to keep in mind is while they go faster and we're concerned about the pedestrian interactions, let's not lose sight that e-bikes are still just as vulnerable on the car, and on the roads. So they still need that level of separation as well.
Commissioner Robson, and then Commissioner Lever.
I was just going to say, if you've seen some of those, you don't need an electronic bike to reach high speeds. Some of these little tiny skinny bikes that people are riding on, they get really fast, so don't blame my e-bike.
I have to have a personal experience here. Once on my bike, I went down. I, for whatever reason, hit the curb, went down. An e-bike, big tires, was coming right at my head. Those are big. Yeah, whereas a 10-speed is not nearly as much mass, not nearly as much speed. Maybe I'm just traumatized from that event. Skin my knee, I'm fine.
I believe you were asking for specific feedback in 2 items. Did we answer both items? I know the
Flexibility, and did you want to finish 228?
oh,
Did you not want to compromise on the shared use path on 220th and 214th? Because if not, then the alternative would be, we need to go through that list and find, which ones we're willing to kind of trade, I think. Finish meaning, you know, it's sparkling from city limits to city limits, and it's, yeah.
So to Commissioner Westerbeck here, the idea is putting all the eggs in the 228th basket and not doing some other things, using that energy or that resources for that to finish that
Yes.
east to west.
So that would be one, and the other one would be, I think, I propose for 20th and 214, they're brand-new roads. There's no bike facility.
Right.
Can we do a shared use path rather than cycle
Right.
tracks on both sides?
Yeah.
That saves some cost and buys us a little bit more work elsewhere as well.
So that's tough. It sounds like I'll just finish my thought. I would tend to be flexible there because I know in the past, so I'm going to be a little flippy floppy here. Personally, I said, oh, well, I'd rather have, like when we were doing the bike plan a few years ago, a handful of absolutely complete, you know, north, south, east, west, even if we only had one of each or something like that. One north and a couple east, west, because they were tall and thin. But in this case, it's like if it was more equitable to get okay paths that are safe or safer than what we have now in multiple places so that multiple neighborhoods could use them versus one that's 2 miles out of the way that people aren't going to use, but it's really awesome. I might lean towards the more, the single path instead of the double deluxe path in more places.
And I think, if I recall, hang on, let me go back.
So that's just me.
Oops, sorry, too far. So here, this would be the list. So the ones that would be lower scoring would probably be East Riverside Drive Trail. Again, the Burke Gilman cost is not a cost generally, it's going to be in a program. So then the Sammamish River would be the other one. So again, you would be giving up that east-west trail versus finishing out 228th. And I struggled with it too. I mean, yeah.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. When you mean finish out, you don't mean, you mean complete it brand new from end to end,
Yep.
as opposed to only improving the sections. So there will be a bike path regardless from one side of the city to the other. When you say finish, it's not like we won't finish it, it'll just stop. You mean that it's the difference between doing a whole new bright shiny top of the line bike path from one end to the other, or only putting in bright shiny new bike path in certain spots where it's needed, like, kind of.
From a sidewalk point of view, it wouldn't matter. You're going to have a complete sidewalk. From a bike point of view, you might be headed west. You're on a protected bike on that facility that had nothing before. You're on a protected bike behind the curb, behind the planter, and there might be a block or two you have to hop onto the road where there's an existing one. So your 11-year-old, you might say, nope, you can't go down 228 beyond here because you'll be on the road, you know. Doesn't mean they can't ride on the sidewalk, but, you know, yeah. Yeah. It's not for everybody, right? On street, which is the whole intent of the bike plan, on streets, we're trying to make facilities for 90% of the people, not, yeah. So there would be certain sections there that you would not want your child on, probably. But if you're commuting and you're an adult and you're comfortable with it, there would certainly be a bike facility. I would say most of it would probably be protected, but there would be exposure gaps. Yeah.
Did I hear you say 70%?
I'm guessing.
That was a guess, and then 30% old. Okay, just guesstimate.
Yep. I know, it's not easy.
Commissioner Westerbeck here, just throwing something in. I mean, we could also explore, you know, Jersey barriers or bollards, saying, okay, you're not going to have to necessarily go on the road, or you're not going to have to just the white stripe protecting you, and so we're going to have to find some cash. So it's in between, because it's not the brand new beautiful trail on both sides, but it's maybe there's a little bit of protection, or even the armadillos or something like that you can order and bolt down to the street. So anyway, again, internet ideas, but
Yep. I think there could be, we're trying to get narrower lanes for
Yeah,
slower speeds, so there might be some buffer.
yeah,
But you guys have driven 228, there's some
Sure.
places that aren't very wide.
Yep.
You may not get that, so, again, just trying to be real, yep.
Commissioner Sills?
I was just gonna say, I lean on doing it all because I think it's all about sort of the vision we want to create and where we're wanting to go as a city. And I think kind of like doing half-seas and then risking like still getting criticized for not doing it completely or not like, or like we're never gonna go back and fill that. Like, let's just be honest about that. So it's either like doing a little or like completely doing it and creating something that's like much more transformational and much more in line with where I saw the comprehensive plan and like the planning going. So I know it's money and it can be reallocated, but that's how I'm leaning. I'm not totally sold, but that's what I would say.
Commissioner Weaver?
I'm sort of moving in that direction as well for like the planning, the long-term planning, with the caveat of, can you help me better understand who might be using it now? Like, what is that user profile? And we may not know it, and it's like the chicken and the egg, right? But is it more like recreational bikers who are just training, and or do we see as a path that will help low-income workers perhaps just really commute? And if we don't have the data, I totally understand that. But I think understanding the profile of the user will really help me inform my decision better.
We don't have that data, so all we have are like the maps we showed. And 228th is a primary corridor, and on the east side and on the west side, we have some communities that, might be catching the new BRT. At the same time, we have people along East Riverside Drive that they have no facility right now that they can't get anywhere as well. So again, it's difficult,
Yeah, this one is a tough one, and I really appreciate the question, the discussion, and all of the data. I think one thing for us to consider is that a lot of our recommendations, and I think a lot of the direction that the city is going in, is to actually spread the growth across the city, and that's going to be happening at the same time. And so I think I'm leaning more in favor of more projects, even if they're not A+ projects. I think the other piece is that, because I do hear the concern, because there is a vision, right? And also part of that vision is for folks to see that first segment, like, wow, look at this, this is amazing. But I also think that we do innovate over time. And so it is possible that if we explore more projects and make our money go as far as we can and spread it across the city, that over time we may actually find some more creative ways to come back and improve these sections. So it's not the end of the world. I don't think it's true to say we will not touch these projects again for 20 years. I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
I'm also looking at, remember I said look high? So if you look at the finished product, so 228th would be one corridor. East Riverside Drive is actually the south-east-west corridor. With the Bothell Way project, even though there's a section between Safeway and 228 that is currently on the street bike, that corridor will actually have a facility all the way up and down the corridor. We would have one up 9th, which is a way to get to the park in 524 as well. If we finish North Creek on the Canyon Park side, that's another north-south on that side of Canyon Park. The other challenging one that I think, when I think of it, is if you think of the park and ride at Brickyard. So getting from west from there to that park and ride, there's nothing along that corridor. The demographics are not like East Riverside Drive or 228, so that's how I looked at it, and it didn't score that high as well, so that's why it fell out that way. So that's another corridor that's a little, so, I mean, I know what is connectivity, right? I mean, you will have a ped path there. It's the bike facility that won't be A+. I worry a little bit about East Riverside Drive that has no ped facility at this point. And although we would provide both there, for us, we're having to pick and choose. Are we going to build East Riverside Drive, or we're going to complete the sidewalk along East Riverside Drive? We don't have the money actually to do both. We would have to pick one or the other. And we're trying to pick the trail because it would handle 2 modes of transportation. And if we can work with King County, we don't have to buy land as well. Again, no answer. That's why I'm asking you folks. But
And that was an
generally-
intense topic of conversation, if I remember, back in June, July with this group, wasn't it? The East Riverside Drive.
And with the council.
Because you were going to work
East
on
Riverside Drive has also come up
kind
with the
of a-
council, so it's,
because you were working on a commission or a group, yeah, that was going to kind of take a stance on that, I think, or something like that.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't that specifically. My memory's fuzzy. Because that's actually one that I feel is really important, because that community's been very vocal. So that's one of the reasons. For East Riverside itself, to have a safe passage east-west, because it's been such a dangerous road. So that's one I still say, like, I'd be willing to sacrifice, some fanciness elsewhere to get that safe corridor. So that was just, it's still in my mind.
If I may say a couple of words in here, where the city is going towards a safe system approach. And you will be hearing from us in the near future in here about reinventing our traffic calming program, and not just for local residential roads, but for higher classification roads a little bit as well. And having that all in mind while we are talking about the Bothell Way improvement projects, one of the first things that we wanted to do is to reduce speeds. And part of the design is to reduce the lane widths, have a wider buffer between north and south, have the visual effect of introducing friction to actually physically slow vehicles down, And there is nothing to say that, 228 or any other road would not be getting some sort of a similar treatment, On Bothell Way, we are providing crossing to make sure that, even that you don't have the ACE level of service standard for low-stress bicycle network, everywhere along the road, but maybe we can have a little bit less, more stress and less level of service, but we're providing that connection and a crossing for a safer, 228 would be possibly getting some sort of a, similar treatment, not necessarily exactly, but, buffered lanes, most of the agencies that I have seen before coming into Bothell, they don't have what Bothell has envisioned, which is 100%, buffer, protected bike lanes, and their protected bike lanes is those candlesticks and buffered lanes and paint on the
We
road
went
and
for
things of this
aspirational.
nature,
Yeah.
And one more thing, which is from a safety point of view, I've looked at well over thousands of collisions that happened in the previous agency I worked on. I was literally watching every single collision that happens on video footage and all of that, and paid special attention to bicycle collisions that are happening. Most of the bicycle collisions that happen is not because of someone shearing into the bike lane when it was just with the pin. It's when usually vehicles are turning at a driveway, at an intersection, and all of that. So that's where the safety issue really is happening. So whether it's bicycle lane protected versus bicycle lane in the travel lane designated as a bicycle facility, at the end of the time where the most critical safety point is when those vehicles are turning, or when the bicycle is going into illegally across an intersection or whatever it is. So, we're going to keep all of that in our mind as well in our decision, I'm hoping. Thanks.
Commissioner Robson?
So I'm hearing you say this, and I know what you're saying is true, and you're saying it to me personally. I still wouldn't let my kids ride in an exposed lane. And so if we're talking whether or not who's going to use it, it doesn't matter what the data says. You're saying it to me directly, and I'm still like, nope. And other people don't have the benefit of your expertise coming at them. So, there's a lot more than just like what the data shows whether or not people will actually feel safe when they ride in exposed bike lanes like that. So something to consider. Along those lines, I would support a full-scale, one-sided bike lane along 228th. That's a super busy area. I think it'll just be a great thoroughfare, and I think there are other places like choosing between the Riverside Bridge and the other places where we can fiddle to create to try to create equality. But I think that area in particular, that whole area could benefit from a really well-designed bike path. They don't have the Burt Gilman. They don't have anything. And to have that kind of be like, no, you can do this as a statement by the city, I think would be really powerful.
Yeah, I think Riverside is really important. It gets a lot of bypass traffic. I mean, commuter traffic is real heavy there. There are also a number of pedestrians there. It's on the way to a number of senior housing facilities, which provide low-income jobs. And you do see people walking to work there. So I think that would be an important one to keep. We did talk about the bridge being perhaps a lower, if you had to make a choice, I would say Riverside is more important than the
I
bridge.
agree.
And I think that's been the consensus. So that one point. The other question you asked a little while back was about 214th and 20th. And, I want to go back to the fact there are environmental constraints there. So when we look at how big to make it, keep those in mind. So I think narrowing it down, there'll be new connections. I think it's probably easier, and I could be wrong, I defer to an expert, but it's probably easier to have traffic calming on a new road and have people start off at a more moderate pace than to try to slow down people on a road that's currently connecting. So I think when those are built, they can be built in mind, or if those are built, they can be built with calming the through traffic in mind and providing the one side, reducing the encroachment on the wetland. That'd be my thought there. Others? Yes, Mr. Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I do believe there is a way that we can reconcile this debate about whether we want to have a transformational transportation system or a flexible and equitable one. But it is a radical solution, and it involves us saying no to building roads through wetlands. And we have to keep that at the beginning so that we can resist car domination and build the things we want to build. May not happen at first, but that is the way to solve it.
So one thing that the 228th project description doesn't have is including safety measures where we're not doing the transformation, so the existing. So that could be added, whether, we wouldn't add it if we were going to say 228 full build. But if we were going to say 228 build where there's nothing, we could add statements in there that basically what Ryan talked about is traffic calming, narrower lanes, try to prevent buffers and all kinds of things so that the on-street one, even though your 11-year-old wouldn't go ahead and mine wouldn't either, for those who do use it, it would be a safer environment. So just offering that up. So I've heard a lot, but I'm not sure if I heard quite a consensus yet. So, and it's a difficult thing. And we can just, what we're going to do is we're going to basically the same presentation to the council. And so what we'll do is, what we will do is we want to pass on your input. And if you have a definite consensus, we're going to say that. If it's just a struggle, we will also say that. One of the things they struggled with is this vision of a complete usable facility versus, hey, this one goes away because of it. So
I think one of the things that's causing us to struggle is trying to understand who the primary users are. So if the goal for the overall concept is to get more people who would be driving cars out of their cars, that could sort of change our perspective a little bit, at least at this moment. If our goal is to provide more recreational facilities for people of all ages, particularly in areas that perhaps don't have those, that might lead us to a different conclusion. And this comes back to your point in terms of do we know enough about what the users, who the users are going to be and what they want, in addition to what the goal of the city is? Because if it is to reduce demand, right, those are people who are commuting to work, who are commuting to the hospital, who are commuting to a park, right? It's that connectivity. So what's better, to have the Cadillac version or to increase the number of projects that we have in the city? I think that's sort of what we're wrestling with, and that's making it difficult.
Commissioner Sills.
That's exactly it. I completely agree. And the way I'm trying to think about it is if I'm rolling down that street in my car, like what is making me look and say, oh, I wish I was that person on the bike, right? Like it's a much more enjoyable experience. I don't know that I would have that reaction if it was the like half in, I don't know how to describe it, but like, not the continuous full project. So that is how I'm trying to think about how do we spur that. So like, oh, I want that on my street, like get people behind this in a way that is just not really currently happening at the level that I think we want it to. Because yeah, we're going like, who would use it? Would they use it if we built all these things? So yeah.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. The other tricky part is that that's a really big road. I mean, who would use it? Like, well, everybody. I mean, it's got the park over there. It's got a school. It's got a whole lot of businesses that could benefit from foot traffic, and it's got green space. So I don't think it's such a big road that, is it echoing, you guys? Okay, is it me?
God.
Yeah. I think that also, makes it harder to decide, but it's another reason why, because it is so long, I feel like, to have at least, to have that nice thoroughfare sort of unites it. And be like, we are all one community, as opposed to being like, you guys are one community, and you guys, but never the twain shall meet. Was another reason why in this particular area, I feel like a unified trail would be beneficial.
Okay. So again, if I hear the direction of building 228, it's great. I think the way it would reflect on this list is essentially East Riverside Drive and the Sammamish River Ped Bridge would go away. Because if I remember correctly, it was about, I got to check, but I think it was like 160 million or something to do all of 228. So we would need both projects, basically.
So this is Commissioner Jones. I think you're hearing a mixed opinion from the council.
Yeah.
I don't think you're hearing a unification. Okay.
Okay.
I agree, because I completely understand Commissioner Sill's point, because I've gone out and nerded out on like when light rails open and stuff, and like Microsoft, they got the new bridges for bikes and stuff. Those are really cool, and you want to go just beyond those because they're such amazing infrastructure. Like, oh, this must be what it's like to be in Amsterdam, right? And you want to go use it more often, and that enticement, I think, is really powerful. But Riverside Drive specifically, like I drove it for years taking my daughter to school, and I actually would have enjoyed taking her on an e-bike or something, but it was just too dangerous. Because there was hardly any shoulder most of the way. But periodically, you guys might have seen him. There's a guy in a wheelchair. Yep. So it just freaks me out every time I see him.
Yep.
And like, we've got to do something about that. So anyway, it's like that sticks in my head when I think about, I'm like, well, I'm willing to sacrifice something else to make sure that we get a trail on one side on the north or the sidewalk on the south, whatever it is, somehow.
Commissioner Upson?
Hold up, wait. We're choosing between doing the Riverside Trail or going full bloom, because I'm sorry, I did not understand that. We're considering doing the Riverside Trail? Oh, no.
Again,
Cross out everything I just said.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the pink projects, thinking, are we going to cut the pink highlighted ones? If we're talking about going full-blown on 228th and then cutting the Riverside Trail, no, we need to do the Riverside Trail. Maybe cutting the bridge, but no, I would definitely do halvesies
Okay.
in that way. Yeah,
I think the bridge would get you partway, not all the way on 228. So,
I would cut the bridge and keep the trail.
Is there some of that federal funding you could go after for that?
built in and pretty aggressive, yes. Again, but take this as a snapshot of where we are with what we know today, and, this is where we are. We can reconsider things, but I think there's a process we go through. We've already reconsidered the 2015 comp plan projects, and we've gone through them, and a couple of them have dropped, okay? Again, in order to do the sub-areas, we highly recommend that you go through a sub-area process, but that's what I'm hearing is maybe we should reconsider that, which I don't know if Cameron would like, but, that's one thing we can take away from this is there are some projects there that people are not that comfortable with, and we would like to readdress those projects. How do we go about doing that? That's great. We can do that. Again, I will say we're not imminently going to be building all these projects in the next 3 years. That we can't do that. It's a starting point. So, but I would like at least to, make sure we're close on that starting point. So, okay. So what I've kind of heard is we would like at some point to revisit the 214th and 20th because of the cost and environmental impacts. I also heard that we would like to complete 228th Street if possible. However, East Riverside Drive Trail is important or some sort of facility down there. So that's a difficult trade-off. Okay. I think we can go from there.
Commissioner Lever?
Thank you. And I think maybe the other thing that I will add, like we've talked about sort of like impact, and I understand there are different assumptions and many things that we do not know, but we do have access to a lot of data, just not from the city of Bothell, but there's just a number of information that we can use to really create scenarios, to really get a sense of the negative and positive impact to help us make that informed decision. So it's not necessarily up to my understanding of what I believe needs to happen in my own mental model of how Bothell should look like. So that's the other thing that I will just add, just really trying to help us make decisions that are based on data, as imperfect as it may be, and then really continue to explore ways in which we can engage the community at a really key critical stages in a way that is not cumbersome. AKA social media again. I'm going to plug for that again. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Something else I think we should really keep in mind is things are changing rapidly. Ray referred to post-COVID and things come back a little. How much are they going to come back? We don't really know. Is the 40% where it's going to be? Is it going to have more people driving back to work or not? E-bikes. What we have now is very different from what we had 5 or 10 years ago, and that changed the whole complexion of it. We haven't even talked about scooters. Well, seriously, and there's a lot of mobility there. So and when transit comes through, the BRT lines, I think what you're going to see in 10 years is going to be very different from what we have now, yet we're developing a 20-year plan. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to be very upfront about the fact that it will be revisited, and maybe even talk about what conditions might bring us to revisit and reopen things, because they are going to be different. And it's I don't want to use the wrong word for this, but to plunge forward with a plan just because it's the plan when things change wouldn't be wise. So I think we need to acknowledge that and talk about what the check-in points would be and what might bring us to make those changes, so.
And I think that's one of the reasons, even if this winds up being the way it is right now, we've taken those things, and those are action items to consider. And when we go out and we show the public this, we assume we're gonna get those kind of input as well. We would have liked to have seen these, and these are things that, again, it's a living document, so the next time we're gonna monitor this and see how things play out. And I gotta give Kendra a hand, because she is trying to estimate traffic and transportation in 20 years post-COVID when nobody knows what's going on. And I honestly think that we're taking a kind of a positive approach, because that's how we want to approach it. And so, but we don't know. So we'll see what the next 3 years brings. And if it's really positive, then we have room for what we heard. If it goes the other way, we'll be adjusting the other way. So again, I think it's a living document, it's a snapshot, it's a planning document, and it's a start. So, yeah, so I appreciate that. And I was quickly trying to go through my highlighted stuff just to make sure. So the other one that we dropped was 35th. Okay. And that was a multimodal project, but again, it didn't score high in the points. It was even below the East Riverside Drive Trail. Okay. You guys all okay with that? I think that's it.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the attachment 5 project superimposed on socioeconomic vulnerability map?
Sure.
It had the 31, 47, 54, the different colors. I was trying to understand, does that mean the higher the number, the more vulnerable?
I believe so.
Okay. Got it. So it's intuitive that way. Okay, got it. Yellow is least vulnerable. Got it.
Okay.
Thanks. So
Next steps, we'll try to collect what we heard here and pass it on in some form or fashion to the council. They're gonna have the same challenges, I'm just gonna tell you, yeah. But we are doing a public outreach, it's probably gonna be virtual, but we're trying to, this is what came out of all our public outreach, listening to everybody, planning commission and council, and I think there will be a couple of questions there. Not questions that say, do you want us to change this project, but more like, what did we miss, or what are you still concerned about? And those will go in the same place yours goes into, so when we open this thing, these are the things we're looking at. Final EIS, October, November, wrapping that up. Plan adoption is still November, December. 2025 is still a big year for transportation, because we're changing the way we're collecting impact fees for transportation. It was all vehicle trips, and now we're gonna collect on person trips. So this whole way of collecting things doesn't mean we're gonna get more money, it just means it's a different way. And like I told you, we're gonna really take a hard look at our design standards, and we'll see how far we can get. You guys had a little taste of how difficult each roadway is. We have to look at all the roads in the city, and I don't know if that's too much to bite for us, but we're gonna give it a shot and see how far we get. So those are gonna happen starting early 2025.
I know it's late, and there was just one issue that I think you brought up, sort of as a question, but we didn't actually talk about it at all, and that is part of the acquisition of all the resources to pay for this included something like a possible new tax or a possible new levy. We don't have time probably to talk about that tonight, but I assume we'll talk about that with the council? In terms of what you're thinking about?
I'm not sure the process, but I know at some point there will be discussion about Safe Street and Sidewalk Levy and whether to replace it or not. And again, snapshot, we had to make a decision. So we put in an estimate, what we thought was reasonable on new revenue. I will tell you it's much less than it was in 2015. I looked at 2015, I went, oh, 1/4 of our entire plan is new revenue, you know? So we think it's reasonable, but yes, that discussion will come up, and frankly, I'm not sure what the process is. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. That was a great discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you, very informative. So, moving along. So moving along, we've completed our study session. Next up is report from members. Do we have anything? I think Commissioner Lever might have something about indigenous land.
Not at this moment. I just sent a request to see if we had a land acknowledgement. So Gabi Kuna did respond to us, and then she's really working diligently with the tribe. She wants to make sure that when there is one, that it is really meaningful to the Native communities. And I actually brought that up because, as you may know, I now work for King County, the NRP, the Department of Natural Resources. So tribal relations is a huge topic. So I right away thought, I wonder if we have a land acknowledgement here. So it looks like it's in the works, and I look forward to hearing more about that particular project. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other, Commissioner Robson?
Yes, Commissioner Lebar has been particularly busy this month. You guys working, coming up with projects and doing work for us. She and I were working on the bridge, our discussion that we had at our last meeting. Steve Morikawa, Deputy Morikawa came up with actually approached City Council during our last meeting about what we had discussed. And so knowing that, then Commissioner Lebar and I were like, oh, well, should we make a statement since they already know? And then now with this discussion here, I'm like, well, maybe we should make a statement just to double down on what we were talking about. We also weren't sure of the level of specificity we wanted to go into. Last time we were talking about the importance just generally of improvements equal, using equality versus with emphasis on the Riverside Bridge, and as we talked about, not putting all of our investments in one basket, and the balance between getting very specific, don't build the bridge, versus let's make sure there's equality. And so we wanted to get your guys' feedback on that. We wrote all kinds of wonderful things. Yeah. But we wanted to kind of be like, all right, we could take this in a lot of ways. We're going to wait to hear what you guys how you want to focus this now that it's already been taken to council and we've seen more about the transportation projects here. So if we can get your guys' just a little bit of your feedback, we can come up with something for you to look at.
Comments? Yes.
Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you so much for working on this together and looking at different angles. My first question is, what was council's reaction as far as you understood to the idea of...
I don't know if there was any, I would have to check again, but I don't know if there was any movement on eliminating that bridge.
I think the concern we discussed and kind of resurfaced again tonight is there's a fair amount of resources on that bridge which take away from other projects. Mm-hmm. And particularly when it's weighed against the Riverside Drive pathway, it doesn't seem like a good trade-off to me anyway, and I think to several other commissioners.
Yeah, I will comment. It's about the bridge specifically, if I recall. Okay. The funny thing is, I've wanted that for so long. Yeah. But I'm also at this point, since we've had this analysis and this deep dive, I'm totally willing to set it aside for these other goals. So despite this being like, I really wish we had that, I'm like, but these other things are really critical, more critical to me. Because that's a selfish want, really. It's just like a nice to have. These other things are kind of, I think they knit the city together and they help populations that would be more impacted and things like that.
Others? We also talked about another point of access to the trail. Recall that? So.
So what I'm hearing is that we do want to make a statement specifically about the bridge, and that's what our statement is in regards. And does that work with
we had just talked briefly about it on the phone, and so we can get pretty hyper-specific about what projects does that we think are worth it and are worth eliminating versus, I don't know, mitigating or maybe modifying. We had talked originally that trying to keep it broad was the better way to do it. You had mentioned that at the last meeting, and but it sounds like we actually do want to keep it pretty specific. Will that work okay with how your projects are aligned and as you prioritize things? Because I know there can be a lot of factors contributing to what gets done. If we're coming out and saying we really don't think this project should be top tier, is that an appropriate thing to say?
I think it's fine. I think you probably want to provide an explanation of why.
Sure, yeah.
Like
yeah,
a
we would do
comparative
that.
thing.
Yeah.
It's nothing against the project, but if we compare it to 228th and completing it, or compare it
Right.
to East Riverside Drive, this
Yeah.
just, we're talking projects, and I think on the phone that it said, yeah, I think because we're talking projects. I
Yeah.
will say that using our own, everybody agreed upon prioritization system.
Yeah.
It actually scored higher than the trade.
I know. I was surprised
So-
by that too.
But
Did you
again,
guys
the
catch that?
scoring is a tool. It's not the end all, so, yeah.
And I think that that was sort of like my take on the, let's just be kind of broad, because at the end of the day, I do believe that the systems that we have in place, I have to trust them, knowing that there's always room for improvement, and I will hesitate of being very directive on what I think we should do with the limited information that I will always have, sort of like as an outsider. So I feel more comfortable with really understanding what the process is and making sure that there is transparency and a hyper focus on the impact, and perhaps really kind of reiterating that, like making sure that we understand the impact of our decisions, and rather than prescribing a particular project as yay or nay. And I think that's kind of like where I am, because at the end of the day, I think that also gives more flexibility to the decision making as well, because we're not putting ourselves in a, and that's sort of kind of where I'm struggling.
I think if you include the discussion you had tonight, I think that helps a lot, because what it does is it stimulates them to think about these things. Even if at the end of the day you say, don't fund the bridge, or if you don't want to be that specific, but if you say, our concerns are, East Riverside Drive seems to provide more access for more people than the bridge would. And we also, now that the comp plan is out, this is not even in the CFP yet, but the comp plan is out, 228th is very important because of these reasons. So if we think about that, we had a discussion and these are our concerns about that. That could be one way to do it, rather than just say, this point versus that point and that thing. Because you had a great discussion, and I think you grasped the struggles staff has about trying to prioritize these things, and there's no right answer. Yeah.
All right.
Can I ask one more?
With a middle point, I like that our concerns are, because that doesn't need to be database. They have the data, we can express our concerns, and present that.
Which is our role as an advising body anyway, so I think it's more in keeping with kind of what we're supposed to do anyway, which is good. I wanted to add, I'd forgotten that I sent you guys information about those little slivers of land.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anything will ever come of that, but I'm just curious if if the city has any interest in reaching out to the property owner and trying to eventually get a little swath there.
So as of right now in the CFP, the draft CFP, we have some planning money for East Riverside Drive. So that will help us talk to King County. And I did receive that. So one of the things would be kind of the broad look at what is this project? Yeah,
Figured I'd throw it out there. Thanks.
it's a good thing.
All right, other reports from members? There is the meeting with council on the 24th, I think you all got email from. Yeah, I'm going to miss that one due to a prior commitment, but hope most of you
Board
can
and
make it.
commission prom.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
yeah.
calling it.
I'm sad, I'm on another board that I had a prior commitment for, so. All right, anything else? All right, reports from staff?
I just have a couple of quick updates from community development. So we did have 2 new senior planners start as of yesterday. Ray Sosa and Eric Jazuski. So we will try to have them at our next planning commission meeting for introductions and opportunity for you all to meet them. We're really excited to have them on board and finally be back up to full capacity. So very exciting. And then I guess just as a look ahead for our meeting later this month, we're going to continue with our conversations on the land use and housing elements of the comprehensive plan. So to provide you all with some updates on the updates that have taken place to those elements over the past month based on the hybrid approach that we discussed in July. So, yep.
Great, thank you. Anything else? All right, there being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn Planning Commission.
Commissioner Westerbeck moves to adjourn. Is there a second?
Commissioner Lever, I second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the September 4th meeting of the Planning Commission is adjourned at 8:31. Our next meeting will be September 18th. See you all then.